I'm just going to use this.
No, you're good.
Okay. All right. So this is a brief rollout of Gnosticism. So Plotinus comes up with this new and improved Platonism, and this is in the 3rd century. It became the intellectual challenge, the philosophic challenge to the early church. And so you will often hear the apostles addressing this, or the Gnostic iteration that came out of it. So Plotinus talks about God, and then he talks about the Demiurge. The Demiurge is Greek for the craftsman. In other words, the Demiurge took the eternal cosmic ideas of all things in the mind of God, and he made them into the physical material world. So here God has a concept of chair, the Demiurge makes a physical chair. God has an idea of a human, the Demiurge makes human. Below the Demiurge we have spirits. In a Christian worldview, this would be the realm of angels, demons, all that sort of thing. And then we get to humans, but humans are in this interesting horizon place, because humans have both a spirit, or if you want a soul, and a physical body. So there's a physical material part of us and a spiritual part. But if you'll notice, everything above this is spirit, and everything below this is going to be material or physical. Below humans, we have animals. Below animals, we have plants. Below plants, we have minerals. All the way to non-being or nothing.
Where would demons be? Spirits?
Yeah, right here. All right, so it's seen as this like cascading thing from pure being to non-being. And this is Neoplatonism. Above this realm is spirit, below this realm is physical material. Humans are so unique is because we have both. We have a spiritual part of us, which connects us above, and a physical part which connects us below. So we're almost like at this horizon point of reality. The Gnostics took this and incorporated it into their belief system. And once again, this is just one version. So if you're reading some Gnostic text or the Valentinians or someone later on, and you're like, well, that's not what they believe, Blackburn, this is just one version. There's thousands of versions. But this one's super interesting. And did any of you see Noah?
Yes.
With Russell Crowe?
I hated that movie, but yes.
You probably hated it because you thought it was about the Genesis account.
That, and it was so unrealistic.
But it's not the Genesis account. They actually were using from the Kabbalah, the Gnostic version of the creation of the world. And that's the one I'm going to give you in red for warning, danger, heresy. And that's a dead red.
Dead red.
The Gnostics come to this, and this is one of the red flags way you can tell a Gnostic. For them, spirit is good, matter is evil. So now it gets really interesting. This being is called the Father of Lights. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
In whom there is no shadow of turning. And because of his goodness and perfection, he would never make anything evil. But the Demiurge, this was the God of the Old Testament. This is Yahweh, the Creator. And what Yahweh did was, he took from the Spirit of God, and he took these spirits and he trapped them in physical material bodies. But not at first. At first they were spirit beings living in a material world. And if you saw that movie about Noah, when they flash back to the garden, you just have these two luminous beings there, right? They're not encased. That was part of the curse. So, if you go to the Genesis account based on this Gnostic version, it's actually the serpent that is the good guy. Because the serpent is telling the humans, if you eat this fruit, you will understand who you really are. And who you really are is, you are children of light. But you have been put in this physical, material, evil world, and it's confused you. But if you eat of this fruit, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God. That was not the lie part, right? That was the good part. And see, in the Gnostic version, it's the serpent trying to free the humans from the spell of the Demiurge. But when the Demiurge finds out that the humans' eyes are opened, what does the Demiurge do? Or what does God do in the Genesis account to Adam and Eve? Once their eyes were open and they saw that they were naked, what happened?
They were ashamed.
Okay, and so God,
He clothed them?
with what?
Weeds.
No,
Animal
they
skin.
clothed themselves with weeds,
Oh.
but he did animal
They
skin.
clothed themselves.
And get ready for it, people. This is the animal skin. Thank you, that was a great response. First time I heard it, same thing. I had heart palpitations because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into the bathroom in the morning and I jump because I'm afraid there's like a wild animal in the bathroom with me, but it's always just me. But these are the animal skins, tooth and claw, fur, and this is the curse. Before we were spirits, spirit children of light. Now we are trapped in these physical bodies, but these bodies are evil. And that's why we have this constant struggle between the spirit, which comes from the true Father of lights, and this flesh, which is driven towards evil. And so when I read that passage to you from Romans 7, where Paul says, with my mind I serve the law of God, but in my members there is no good thing. And it's very concerning to me because it sounds like Paul is just rolling out Gnosticism 101. This is like Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, where the God of light makes your non-physical part and the God of darkness makes your evil part, right? But now we have it a little more fine-tuned with these Gnostics, like there's this high God and then there's this this sub-deity that's done all this mess. So the God of this world is actually a very bad character. And so, as the scriptures continue, when the fullness of time had come, the Spirit of the Christ comes from the Father of lights. He's able to get past the Demiurge, and he is able to come into the human realm and rescue our human souls and spirits and take us back home to where we belong, back to the Father of lights, and we become children of lights. But see, this means, are you guys familiar with the gospel according to Judas?
I've heard of it, never read it though.
See, we have these Gnostic Gospels which were condemned by the church and they were destroyed and were not rediscovered until, I believe, 1948. I have to double check that, in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. I believe it's the same year they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, so freaky deaky. So here you have all these ancient canonized texts being unveiled with some other interesting things in there, and then you have these lost Gnostic texts being unearthed in the desert that have been buried. And you can read them all in English today. They've been translated, distributed. You can have access to them and understand them. And one of these books is called The Gospel According to Judas. And if you Google it or go to YouTube, you can actually watch some little clips where, I think it was National Geographic or someone actually took the gospel and put it into like a drama so you can see the dialogue. And in one scene, it's at the Last Supper. Jesus comes into the Last Supper and he sees all the disciples praying and begging God and imploring his mercy and stuff in their lives. And Jesus starts laughing, but it's not a happy laugh. It's like a malicious laughing of scorn. And the disciples are offended. And they're like, why are you laughing at us, Jesus? He says, because you don't even know who you're worshiping. You're praying to this deity that has done all these horrible things to you. But I am here to free you and bring you back home to where you belong.
To the true, to
Right.
the true God.
Not to that mean old bully God of the Old Testament, but to this true God of love and light. But do you see how, speak of turning the scriptures on its head, now Judas becomes the only disciple that gets it, that in order for Jesus to go back home, he has to be freed of his physical body. So Judas is actually helping Jesus accomplish his task by betraying him to liberate his soul back to the Father. Incredible. And so, and this is part of where many of the early Christological heresies come from. And that's a $20 theological term for having to do with the nature of Christ. So a Christological heresy is confusing the person or nature of Christ. And usually they wreck in either ditch. He's fully divine and not human, or all human and not divine. The scriptural teaching, I believe, is the hypostatic union, where he is the God-man. And we can talk that out later if you want. But the Christological heresies, many of them in the New Testament have to do with the nature of Christ. And in the epistles of John, John tells us, anyone that denies that Christ is come in the flesh is a heretic, a false prophet, a false teacher. But do you see why a Gnostic would have to deny that Jesus had a body? Because if Jesus had a body, he would have been tainted by evil. So the Gnostic Jesus has to be kind of like a phantasm or a spirit or like a ghost. Or it's a Jewish human that the Spirit of the Christ possesses and then departs upon crucifixion. Pretty trippy. Okay. So, what happens when we come to the scriptures, if you have this sort of Gnostic thinking going on in your head, this is how we get asceticism, where we talked about if we suppress the flesh, it will let the spirit grow, or if we starve the spirit, it will make the flesh more powerful. And so, are we out of time?
3 minutes.
Okay, let me just wrap this up and we'll pick up here, because this is going to be so important. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these passages, like Romans 7, Galatians 5, and we're going to look at what the Greek word is. And whether it's spirit, this word, sarx, is normally translated flesh. And it can mean flesh and blood, but this is normally soma. When you're talking about your physical body, that's soma. When we're talking about sarx, the context will tell you, or should tell you, if it's your physical body, or is it the appetites that come from having a physical body. So in other words, this is a physical body, which means it needs rest, it needs nutrients, these sorts of things. It needs clothing, shelter, protection. But these appetites are not the same as the physical body, but we have them because we have a physical body. So for example, because I have a body, I get tired, I get hungry, because I have genitalia, I have sexual urges, etc. None of those things are wrong or evil. The Gnostics would say those are all bad because they're material. The idea, though, is the problem isn't having those appetites, because it tells us Christ came in the
Flesh.
sarx. Yes, in the flesh. And Christ, like us, got tired, got hungry. I'm sure he had certain urges. The problem isn't the appetites or the desires, it's what we do with them. If we rest too much, we're a sluggard. If we eat too much, we're a glutton. If we're using our sexuality in an unprescribed way, it's fornication, adultery, etc. And so the appetites aren't the problem, but how they're used. For the Gnostics, just the appetites themselves would be evil, because they're coming from the physical material. All right, I'll pick up there.